The fluorescent lights of the military hospital buzzed overhead as Captain Rebecca Hayes made her way down the crowded hallway. Her right leg throbbed with each step, and the crutch under her arm felt like it weighed 100 pounds. 3 months had passed since the explosion that changed everything, but some days it felt like yesterday. She wasn't wearing her uniform today. Just simple jeans and a faded college sweatshirt. Physical therapy didn't require dress blues, and honestly, getting into uniform with her leg still healing was more trouble than it was worth. Besides, she'd spent enough years in camouflage and desert tan. Sometimes it felt good to just blend in and be normal for a few hours. The cafeteria was just ahead, and Rebecca's stomach reminded her she'd skipped breakfast to make her early therapy appointment. The smell of coffee and whatever they were serving for lunch drifted through the air. She picked up her pace slightly, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through her thigh. That's when she saw them blocking the doorway. 5 young Marines stood in a loose cluster right at the entrance, their uniforms so crisp they practically crackled. They couldn't have been more than 22 or 23 years old, fresh-faced and loud with the kind of confidence that comes before you've seen real combat. They were laughing about something, gesturing wildly, completely oblivious to the fact that they were blocking the entire entrance. Rebecca approached slowly, adjusting her grip on the crutch. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice barely carrying over their laughter. None of them moved. They didn't even seem to hear her. She tried again, a little louder this time. "Excuse me, guys. I need to get through." One of them, a tall kid with a high and tight haircut that looked like it had been done that morning, glanced over his shoulder at her. His eyes swept over her civilian clothes, lingered on the crutch, and then dismissed her entirely. He turned back to his friends without saying a word. Rebecca felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. "Hey, I just need to squeeze past you." This time, the tall one actually responded. He looked at her again, this time with a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Civilian entrance is around back," he said, his tone making it clear he thought he was being funny. One of his buddies, a shorter Marine with sergeant stripes, laughed and added, "Yeah, this is a military facility. You might want to try the regular hospital down the street." Rebecca stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Part of her wanted to say something, wanted to pull out her military ID and watch their faces change, wanted to tell them about the day she earned that limp, about the 4 soldiers who were alive right now because she'd refused to leave them behind, about the medals sitting in a drawer back home because she'd never felt right wearing them. But she was tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical therapy. The kind of tired that comes from fighting too many battles, both overseas and in her own head during the long nights when the memories wouldn't stay buried. "Right," she said quietly. "My mistake." She started to turn around, the movement awkward with the crutch. The hallway behind her stretched long and empty, and she knew the other entrance was at least a 5-minute walk. 5 minutes of pain shooting through her leg with every step. 5 minutes of wondering when she'd started becoming invisible. The Marines had already forgotten about her, back to their conversation about their upcoming deployment to Japan. One of them was bragging about all the things he planned to do on Liberty. Another was complaining about the required training they had to complete before shipping out. Normal military conversation, the kind she'd had 1,000 times herself. What none of them noticed, what Rebecca herself didn't notice as she slowly turned away, was the table in the far corner of the cafeteria. 6 men sat there in civilian clothes, jeans, plain t-shirts, nothing that would make them stand out in a crowd. But if you looked closely, really looked, you'd notice things. The way they sat with their backs to the walls, the way their eyes constantly scanned the room, the way they all stopped talking at exactly the same moment, their attention locked on the scene playing out at the entrance. These weren't regular servicemen grabbing lunch between meetings. They were members of SEAL Team 5, taking a break from a classified briefing that had already lasted 6 hours and showed no signs of ending soon. They'd earned this coffee break, and they'd been enjoying the rare quiet moment before heading back to the conference room. The senior member of the group, a chief petty officer named Jack Patterson, set his coffee cup down on the table with a soft click. His eyes hadn't left the woman with the crutch since she'd first approached those Marines. He knew exactly who she was. "That's Captain Hayes," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly to his teammates in the suddenly silent corner. The youngest member of their team, a petty officer named Chris Vega, looked up from his phone. "Who?" Captain Rebecca Hayes, Army Medical Corps. Jack's voice had taken on a different quality now, something hard and cold. You remember that story about the medic in Kandahar province? The one who ran through a kill zone twice to reach wounded soldiers? Chris's eyes widened. The one who got blown up and still kept working? That's her, another SEAL confirmed. Lieutenant Dan Rivers had served a joint operation with Army units 3 years ago, and he'd heard the stories firsthand from soldiers who'd been there. She saved 4 lives that day before that IED went off. Shattered her femur, broke 3 ribs, concussion that should have killed her. And you know what she did while she was waiting for the medevac? Nobody answered. They were all watching now, watching the woman slowly making her way back down the hallway, each step clearly causing her pain. She kept treating casualties, Dan continued. Refused morphine because she said she needed to stay sharp. There were 11 wounded soldiers in that firefight, and she worked on every single one of them before she'd let anyone touch her own injuries. Jesus, someone muttered. Jack was already standing. The other 5 followed immediately, their chairs scraping against the floor. The movement caught the attention of the Marines at the door, who turned to see what was happening. What they saw made their smiles fade instantly. 6 men walking toward them with purpose. Not rushing, not aggressive, but moving with the kind of quiet confidence that combat veterans recognize in each other, the kind of bearing that says they've been tested in ways most people can't imagine and came through it. The tall Marine with the smirk suddenly didn't look so confident anymore. His buddy, the sergeant, straightened up instinctively, his military training kicking in even before he consciously realized these weren't just regular guys. Jack Patterson stopped 3 feet away from them. He wasn't a particularly tall man, maybe 5'10", but something about the way he stood made him seem much larger. His voice when he spoke was quiet but carried the kind of authority that made everyone within 20 feet stop what they were doing and listen. "Gentlemen," he said, the words somehow managing to sound both polite and threatening at the same time. "Do you know who you just turned away?" The Marines exchanged nervous glances. The cafeteria had gone quiet. Dozens of people now watching the confrontation unfold. The tall Marine cleared his throat. "Sir, we didn't mean any disrespect. We just thought..." "You thought what?" Lieutenant Rivers stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You thought because she's in civilian clothes and using a crutch that she doesn't belong here? That she's just some random person who wandered into a military hospital?" The silence that followed was deafening. In the hallway beyond, Captain Rebecca Hayes had stopped walking, alerted by the change in atmosphere. She turned slowly, confused about what was happening. And that's when everything changed. Jack Patterson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Years of leading men through situations where a whisper could mean the difference between life and death had taught him that real authority doesn't come from volume. It comes from certainty. "That woman you just dismissed," he said, his eyes moving from one Marine to the next, making sure each one of them felt the weight of what he was about to say, "has more combat experience than all of you combined. And I mean that literally." The tall Marine's face had gone pale. "We didn't know, Chief, she wasn't in uniform, and we just assumed..." "You assumed," interrupted Tony Chen, the team's medic. His voice carried an edge that surprised even his teammates. Tony was usually the quiet one, the guy who cracked jokes to diffuse tension. But right now there was no humor in his expression. "You assumed because you saw a woman with a limp and civilian clothes that she was nobody important. Nobody worth your time or respect." Rebecca had stopped in the hallway about 30 feet away. She stood there, leaning heavily on her crutch, trying to figure out what was happening. Part of her wanted to keep walking to avoid whatever this was becoming. But curiosity and something else, maybe a small flicker of hope, kept her rooted to the spot. Lieutenant Dan Rivers pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. He found what he was looking for and turned it to face the Marines. "This is Captain Rebecca Hayes 3 years ago. Recognize her?" The image showed a woman in desert combat fatigues, her face streaked with dust and blood, her helmet slightly askew. She was kneeling next to a wounded soldier, her hands working frantically at a pressure bandage. Behind her, you could see smoke and fire, the unmistakable chaos of a battle still in progress. But what really caught your attention was her face, the absolute focus, the determination, the look of someone who had decided that death itself would have to go through her to get to the soldier she was treating. "That was taken during the Battle of Marja," Dan continued. 5-hour firefight, Enemy forces had pinned down an entire squad. They were taking heavy casualties and their medic was already wounded. Captain Hayes heard the call for medical support and volunteered to go in. Another SEAL, Mike Rodriguez, picked up the story. His voice was rougher, more emotional. Mike wasn't usually one to show feelings, but this clearly meant something personal to him. The company commander told her no, said it was too dangerous, that they'd wait for the situation to stabilize. You know what she said? The Marines shook their heads, transfixed now. She said, "Those men are dying right now, sir. They don't have time for the situation to stabilize." Mike's voice cracked slightly. She grabbed her medical pack and went anyway. Ran straight into a kill zone while rounds were still coming in. "That's not procedure," the Sergeant Marine said quietly, almost to himself. "No," Jack agreed. "It's not procedure. It's heroism. There's a difference." The youngest SEAL, Chris Vega, spoke up for the first time. He was the newest member of the team, still proving himself, and his voice carried a kind of awe that the others had long since learned to hide. She made 2 trips into that zone. First time she reached 3 wounded soldiers and got them stable enough to be moved. Second time she went back for a 4th soldier who'd taken shrapnel to the chest and was bleeding out. "That's when the IED went off," Jack said quietly. She'd just finished applying a chest seal when the device detonated 6 feet from her position. The blast threw her 15 feet, shattered her right femur in 3 places, broke 3 ribs. Severe concussion. The kind of injuries that end careers. The cafeteria was completely silent now. People at other tables had abandoned their lunches, listening to every word. Someone was recording on their phone. A few older veterans in the crowd were nodding, their eyes distant with memories of their own battles. Tony Chen stepped closer to the Marines, and his voice dropped even lower. "You want to know what she did after that blast? While she was lying there with a broken leg and fractured ribs?" Nobody answered. They didn't need to. "She stayed conscious through sheer willpower," Tony continued. "Refused the morphine the arriving medics tried to give her. Said she needed to stay alert in case there were more casualties. She walked the incoming medics through the status of every wounded soldier she'd treated, gave them exact details on injuries and treatment already provided, even reminded them that one of the soldiers was allergic to penicillin, all while her own femur was sticking through the skin." One of the Marines made a small sound, something between a gasp and a groan. "That's not even the impressive part," Dan added. 2 days later, she's lying in a hospital bed in Germany, leg in traction, barely able to move without pain medication, and she's on her laptop coordinating medical supply drops for 3 different forward operating bases because she knew the inventory system better than anyone, and soldiers were running low on critical supplies. Lieutenant Rivers pulled up another image on his phone. This one showed a formal military ceremony. Rebecca stood in dress uniform, her right leg in a brace, accepting a medal from a general. Silver Star for extraordinary heroism, Bronze Star with V device for valor, Purple Heart. That's not counting the 2 bronze stars she already had from previous deployments. Jack took over again, his voice steady and matter-of-fact, which somehow made the words hit even harder. 3 combat tours, 247 soldiers treated under fire, 39 lives directly saved. And those are just the ones we know about. The classified operations she's been involved in would probably double those numbers. "Why didn't she say anything?" the tall Marine asked, his voice barely above a whisper. When we told her to use the civilian entrance. Why didn't she just tell us who she was?" Mike Rodriguez let out a harsh laugh. "Because people like Captain Hayes don't need to prove themselves to anyone. They've already proven everything that matters where it actually counts, on the battlefield, when lives are on the line, when everything's going wrong and someone has to step up and do the impossible." Tony pulled out his own phone and showed them another image. This one was less formal, clearly taken by someone's personal camera. It showed Rebecca surrounded by a group of young soldiers, all of them in combat fatigues, all of them smiling despite the dusty, harsh conditions visible in the background. She was teaching them something, her hands demonstrating a technique on a training dummy. She spent her downtime between missions training other medics, Tony explained. Developed a tourniquet application technique that's now standard training across all military branches. I use her method every single time I'm in the field. She saved lives she'll never even know about because she taught others how to do it right. The youngest Marine, who hadn't spoken yet, finally found his voice. "I think I learned that technique in combat lifesaver training. They called it the Hayes method." "That's her," Tony confirmed. The instructor probably didn't tell you that she developed it under fire, in the middle of a firefight, when standard procedure wasn't working fast enough and soldiers were bleeding out. She improvised, saved the soldier's life, and then wrote it up and submitted it to the medical training command. Didn't ask for credit, didn't ask for recognition, just wanted to make sure other medics had the knowledge to save more lives. Jack looked each of the Marines in the eye, one by one. So when you see someone in civilian clothes with a crutch, someone who looks tired and worn down, someone who doesn't match your image of what a warrior should look like, maybe consider that you have absolutely no idea what that person has been through, what they've sacrificed, what they've accomplished. "We're sorry, Chief," the tall Marine said, and this time there was no false bravado, no smirking confidence, just genuine shame. "We were completely out of line. Don't apologize to me," Jack said sharply. "I'm not the one you disrespected." He nodded toward the hallway where Rebecca still stood, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of embarrassment and something else that might have been gratitude. She'd caught enough of the conversation to understand what was happening, and her cheeks had flushed red. The Marines turned to look at her, and suddenly the distance between the cafeteria entrance and where she stood seemed enormous. Dan Rivers wasn't done yet. "You want to know the hardest part about what you did? It's not just that you disrespected a decorated combat veteran, it's that you revealed something about yourselves. You revealed that you judge people by appearances, that you assume authority and respect only come from uniforms and ranks you can see, and that's dangerous." "Dangerous how, sir?" the sergeant asked. "Because someday you might be in a situation where the person who can save your life, who has the knowledge and experience you need, doesn't look like what you expect," Dan explained. "Maybe it's a local national who knows where the enemy is hiding. Maybe it's an intel analyst who looks too young to be trusted. Maybe it's a female pilot or a wounded veteran or someone who doesn't fit your preconceived notions of what a warrior looks like. And if you're too busy judging them by their appearance to listen to what they're telling you, people die." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. "So here's what's going to happen," Jack said, his voice taking on a tone of command that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "You're going to walk over to Captain Hayes," Jack continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're going to apologize sincerely and specifically, and then you're going to listen to whatever she has to say to you, because I guarantee she'll handle this with more grace than you deserve." The 5 Marines nodded, their expressions a mixture of shame and determination, but Jack held up a hand, stopping them before they could move. "Not yet," he said. "First, you need to understand the full story, not just the highlights. Not just the medals and the heroics. You need to understand what service really means and what it costs." He gestured to an empty table nearby. "Sit down." The Marines sat and the SEAL team pulled up chairs around them. Rebecca, still standing in the hallway, seemed to realize what was about to happen. She started to shake her head to wave them off, but Jack caught her eye and gave her a small nod that said, "Trust me. This needs to happen." She hesitated, then found a chair along the wall and sat down, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of attention but too far away to stop what was unfolding. Tony Chen started the next part of the story. Captain Hayes didn't join the military because of some family tradition or because she couldn't find another job. She had a full scholarship to medical school. Top of her class, could have been a surgeon anywhere in the country, making 3 times what the military pays. Why'd she join then? One of the younger Marines asked. "Her older brother was killed in Iraq," Mike Rodriguez answered. "He was a sergeant, died pulling 2 soldiers out of a burning vehicle. She was 22 years old, about to start medical school, and she decided that if she was going to be a doctor, she wanted to be where she could make a real difference, where her skills would matter most." Dan Rivers pulled up another image on his phone, this one showing a much younger Rebecca in her army dress uniform at what was clearly a commissioning ceremony. Her smile was bright, full of hope and determination. It was striking how different she looked from the tired woman sitting in the hallway. "First deployment was rough," Dan continued. "She was assigned to a forward operating base in one of the hottest zones in Afghanistan. Her first week there, they took casualties, 7 wounded in a single rocket attack. She worked for 18 straight hours, no breaks, barely any water, saved 6 of the 7. What happened to the 7th? The sergeant asked quietly. Injuries were too severe. He died on the table. Tony's voice was soft. She was 26 years old, and she had to call that soldier's wife and tell her that her husband wasn't coming home. Then she went back on duty the next day because they had a patrol going out, and someone needed to be ready if things went wrong. Jack leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. That's the part people don't talk about when they talk about heroes. The weight, the ones you can't save, the calls you have to make, the nightmares that come later. Captain Hayes has had to make 17 of those calls over 3 tours. 17 families she had to tell that their son or daughter, husband or wife wasn't coming home. The cafeteria had gotten even quieter if that was possible. A few people were wiping their eyes. One older veteran in the corner stood at attention, a silent gesture of respect. Second tour was worse, Mike picked up the story. Her base got hit with a coordinated attack. Dozens of casualties. The main medical facility took a direct hit, destroyed half their equipment. She set up a field hospital in a bunker with whatever supplies she could salvage. Operated on critical casualties for 2 days straight, while the base was still under sporadic fire. She didn't sleep? One of the Marines asked, disbelief in his voice. Couldn't, Tony explained. Too many wounded, not enough medical personnel. She took stimulants to stay awake, kept working until the siege ended and they could evacuate the critical cases. After it was over, she collapsed. Slept for 16 hours straight. Woke up and went right back to work because soldiers still needed care. Chris Vega, the youngest SEAL, added his piece. My instructor in combat medicine told us about that incident. Said it was a textbook example of how to manage mass casualties under impossible conditions. They teach her methods now at the Army Medical Training School. She wrote the manual on combat trauma care that every military medic studies. Dan pulled up yet another image, this one showing Rebecca with a group of Afghan children outside a small clinic. She was smiling, holding a small girl who had her arm in a sling. She didn't just treat military personnel. On her downtime, she'd go to local villages and provide medical care to civilians. Treated hundreds of Afghan children and families. Built relationships with local leaders. Some of them became crucial intelligence sources because they trusted her. One time, Mike said, his voice taking on a different quality, she was treating a young boy who'd stepped on a mine, lost his leg below the knee. She not only saved his life, but spent months coordinating with aid organizations to get him a prosthetic. Followed up with him for years after her deployment ended. Last I heard, that kid's in college now, wants to be a doctor because of her. Jack looked at the Marines, making sure they were following. See, this is what you need to understand. Being a soldier, being a Marine, being any kind of service member isn't about looking tough or talking tough or knowing how to shoot straight. Those things matter, sure. But what really matters is what you do when nobody's watching. How you treat people who can't do anything for you, whether you see the uniform or the human being underneath it. The tall Marine who'd made the initial dismissive comment spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. Chief, we get it. We messed up bad. We judged someone we had no right to judge, and we're going to make it right. But can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you know all this about her? About the specific operations and the calls to families and all the details? Jack exchanged glances with his teammates. Some of it's from official reports. Some of it's from soldiers we've served with who were there. And some of it's because 3 years ago, my team was on a joint operation with her unit. We spent 2 months working together, and I saw firsthand what she does and who she is. He paused, and his voice got quieter, more personal. One of my guys took shrapnel during that operation. Piece of metal went through his shoulder, missed his subclavian artery by maybe half an inch. Captain Hayes treated him under fire, kept him stable, and made sure he got evacuated safely. That SEAL is still in the teams today because of her. So yeah, this is personal. Tony added his own connection. She trained me, not officially, but during that joint op, I spent every spare moment picking her brain. She taught me things about combat medicine that I'd never learned in any formal training. Techniques she'd developed in the field, shortcuts that save time, ways to stay calm when everything's chaos. I'm a better medic because of her, which means I've saved lives because of her. Dan had his own story. My younger sister joined the Army Medical Corps because of Captain Hayes. Saw a news article about her, reached out, and Captain Hayes spent time mentoring her, answering questions, encouraging her. My sister's deployed right now, serving as a combat medic, and she carries a photo of Captain Hayes in her gear as a reminder of the standard she's aiming for. The Marines sat in silence, absorbing all of this. The weight of their mistake was clearly crushing them, but there was something else in their expressions too. A kind of awakening, a realization that service and sacrifice looked different than they'd imagined. Mike looked at them seriously. You five are young. You're at the beginning of your military careers. You haven't seen combat yet, haven't been tested. That's fine. Everyone starts somewhere. But you need to understand something right now. Before you deploy, before you face the real challenges. Whoa. What's that? The sergeant asked. The strongest person in any room might not look like what you expect, might not talk like what you expect, might not fit your image of what strength looks like. And if you're so blinded by your own assumptions that you can't see real courage and real sacrifice when it's standing right in front of you, then you're going to miss out on learning from the people who could teach you the most. Jack stood up and the other SEALs followed. All right. Now you're ready. Go apologize to Captain Hayes. Be sincere. Be specific. And be humble. The 5 Marines stood, their movements almost synchronized. They walked toward Rebecca as a group, their earlier swagger completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse and respect. Rebecca saw them coming and straightened in her chair, her hand tightening slightly on her crutch. She didn't look angry, just tired and a little wary. She'd been through too much to have much patience for empty apologies or forced gestures. The tall Marine reached her first. He came to attention, his posture parade ground perfect. Captain Hayes, ma'am. I need to apologize to you. Rebecca looked up at him, her expression neutral. At ease, Marine. He relaxed slightly but maintained eye contact even though you could see how difficult it was for him. Ma'am, what we did back there was inexcusable. We judged you based on your appearance, we disrespected you, and we failed to show the basic courtesy that every person deserves, let alone a decorated combat veteran. There's no excuse for our behavior, and I'm deeply sorry. Each of the other Marines offered their own apologies, each one personal and specific. They weren't just parroting the SE. Rebecca listened to each apology in silence, her face unreadable. When the last Marine finished speaking, she let the silence stretch for a moment. Then she gestured to the empty chairs around her. Sit down, she said simply. The Marines sat, looking uncertain. They'd expected her to accept their apologies and send them on their way, maybe with a lecture about respect. What they got instead was something different. You want to know why I didn't tell you who I was back there? Rebecca asked, her voice calm but firm. Why I didn't pull rank or flash my military ID or demand respect? The tall Marine nodded. Yes, ma'am. We've been wondering about that. Because I shouldn't have to, she said simply. Think about that for a minute. Really think about it. You 5 saw a person who needed help getting through a doorway. That person happened to be using a crutch, which should have made you more inclined to help, not less. But instead you saw someone you decided didn't matter, someone you could dismiss. She leaned forward slightly, and despite her casual clothes and obvious exhaustion, there was an undeniable authority in her presence. Now I know you're thinking that you dismissed me because you thought I was a civilian, not because I'm a woman or because of the crutch. But here's the thing. Even if I was a civilian, I still deserved basic human courtesy. I still deserved respect, not because of what I've done or what medals I've earned, but because I'm a person. The sergeant shifted uncomfortably. You're absolutely right, ma'am. But let's talk about the bigger issue here, Rebecca continued. You 5 are Marines. You're about to deploy, right? First time overseas? They nodded. Then you need to hear this, and you need to hear it now before you're in a situation where these assumptions can get people killed. Her voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it. In combat, you're going to encounter all kinds of people. Local nationals who don't look like soldiers but know where the enemy is hiding. Intelligence analysts who might be young or female or look like they've never seen combat. Wounded veterans who've been through hell and have knowledge that could save your lives. She paused, making eye contact with each of them. If your first instinct is to judge those people by how they look, by whether they fit your preconceived notion of what a warrior or an expert or a leader should look like, then you're going to make fatal mistakes. And in combat, fatal means exactly what it sounds like. One of the younger Marines spoke up, his voice hesitant. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you not get angry? I mean, we were really disrespectful and you're teaching us instead of chewing us out. How? Rebecca was quiet for a moment and something in her expression softened slightly. Because I remember being young and stupid. I remember making assumptions and learning the hard way that I was wrong. And I remember the people who took the time to teach me instead of just writing me off. She adjusted her position, wincing slightly as her legs shifted. On my first deployment, I assumed I knew everything because I'd gone through all the training, passed all the tests. Then I got to Afghanistan and realized I didn't know anything about the reality of combat medicine. I made mistakes. Small ones, thankfully, but mistakes that could have been bigger. What changed? The tall Marine asked. A sergeant, older guy, probably close to retirement. He'd done 4 tours, seen more combat than I could imagine. He pulled me aside one day and said, "Captain, you're book smart, but you're field stupid. And if you don't fix that fast, someone's going to die." Then he spent the next 3 months teaching me everything the books don't tell you. She smiled slightly at the memory. He didn't have to do that. I was an officer, he was enlisted. Technically, I outranked him. But he saw someone who needed help, and he helped. That's what service looks like. Not ranks and uniforms and protocols. It's looking past all that surface stuff and seeing what matters. Tony Chen, who'd been listening from a nearby table with the other SEALs, walked over and joined them. Captain Hayes taught me the same way that Sergeant taught her. Took time she didn't have, shared knowledge she'd earned the hard way, all because she saw someone who wanted to learn. Rebecca shook her head. Tony makes it sound more noble than it was. Truth is, teaching is selfish. Every medic I train, every technique I share, that's more chances for soldiers to come home alive. The knowledge doesn't do anyone any good locked in my head. But that's exactly what makes it noble, the Sergeant Marine said. You don't see it as a favor you're doing. You see it as your responsibility. And that, Jack Patterson said, walking over to join the growing group, is the difference between someone who wears the uniform and someone who lives it. Rebecca looked uncomfortable with the praise. Chief, please. You're going to make me sound like some kind of saint. I'm not. I've made mistakes, lost my temper, failed at things I should have succeeded at. I'm just a medic doing my job. Just a medic, Mike Rodriguez repeated, shaking his head. See, that's what I mean. She's got a silver star. Multiple bronze stars, saved dozens of lives. Trained hundreds of medics, and she describes herself as just a medic doing my job. Because that's what it is, Rebecca insisted. Every single person in uniform is just doing their job. The cooks feeding troops, the mechanics keeping vehicles running, the logistics personnel making sure supplies get where they need to go. We're all part of the same mission. Some of us just happen to be in positions where our contributions are more visible. She turned back to the 5 Marines. You want to know what I hope you take away from this? It's not about me or my service record. It's about understanding that everyone you meet is carrying something you can't see. That person who looks weak might be the strongest person you ever meet. That person who doesn't fit your image of a warrior might be the one who saves your life. The youngest Marine, who'd been mostly quiet, finally spoke up. Ma'am, when you went back into that kill zone for the 4th wounded soldier, the one right before the IED went off, did you know it was dangerous? Did you think about not going? Rebecca's expression changed, becoming more distant, like she was looking at something the rest of them couldn't see. I knew exactly how dangerous it was, and yes, part of me wanted to stay where it was safer, but that soldier was dying, and I was the only one who could get to him in time. So the question wasn't whether to go. The question was whether I could live with myself if I didn't. How do you find that kind of courage? He asked. It's not courage, she said quietly. Courage is when you're scared, but you do it anyway. What I felt in that moment was more like clarity. Everything got very simple. There was a soldier who needed help, and I had the skills to help him. Nothing else mattered. Dan Rivers leaned against the wall nearby. That's what people don't understand about combat heroism. It's not about being fearless. It's about being so focused on your mission, so committed to your brothers and sisters in arms that fear becomes secondary. Rebecca nodded. Exactly. And after it's over, that's when the fear hits. When you're lying in a hospital bed and you realize how close you came to dying. When you wake up at 3 in the morning replaying every moment, thinking about all the things that could have gone differently. She looked down at her leg, still in the brace. This injury, as bad as it was, I consider myself lucky. I came home. I'm alive. I get to do physical therapy and complain about cafeteria food and work toward getting back to duty. 17 soldiers I treated didn't get that chance. Their families are living with empty chairs at the dinner table. So when I think about what I've lost, I remember what they lost, and my problems seem pretty small. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Several people in the surrounding area were openly crying now. The story had drawn more listeners, and a crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. Jack Patterson cleared his throat. Captain, I think these Marines have learned their lesson, but I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share one more thing with them. What's that? What you want them to remember when they deploy. What advice you'd give to young Marines heading into their first combat zone? Rebecca thought about it for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, and everyone in the cafeteria strained to hear her words. Remember that you're not just representing yourselves over there, Rebecca began. You're representing every service member who's ever worn the uniform. Every interaction you have with local nationals, every decision you make under pressure, every moment when you choose between the easy path and the right path that shapes how people see America and the military. She shifted in her chair, getting more comfortable settling into the role of teacher. Treat everyone with respect until they give you a specific reason not to. And I mean everyone. The local interpreter who doesn't speak perfect English, the village elder who won't make eye contact, the young woman trying to tell you about enemy movements through a male relative because that's her culture. They all have value. They all have knowledge. They all deserve dignity. The tall Marine was taking notes on his phone now. The others leaned in closer, not wanting to miss a word. Listen more than you talk, she continued. This is especially important for Marines because you're trained to be aggressive, to take action, to dominate. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is shut up and listen. The locals know their area better than you ever will. The older NCOs in your unit have experience you haven't earned yet. Even the person who seems least important might have the piece of information that saves lives. Tony Chen nodded in agreement. She's right. Half the successful operations I've been on worked because someone was smart enough to listen to local intelligence instead of just following the original plan. Take care of your people, Rebecca said. And I don't just mean physically. Check on your Marines' mental health. Notice when someone's not sleeping, when they're withdrawing, when they're drinking too much or taking unnecessary risks. Combat does things to your head that you can't see on the outside. Some of the strongest people I've known have struggled after deployment, and they struggled in silence because they didn't think anyone would understand or they were afraid of seeming weak. She paused, and her voice got softer. I've lost more soldiers to suicide after they came home than I lost to combat while we were deployed. Think about that. They survived the war only to lose the battle with their own minds. Don't let that happen to your Marines. Create a culture where it's okay to not be okay, where asking for help is seen as strength, not weakness. Mike Rodriguez added, and that goes for you too. If you're struggling, speak up. Talk to your chaplain, your medical personnel, your command. There's no shame in getting help. The only shame is in suffering alone when resources are available. Rebecca nodded. Absolutely. I did therapy after my second deployment because I was having nightmares and flashbacks. Best decision I ever made. Made me more effective, not less. Made me better at helping my soldiers deal with their own trauma because I'd worked through mine. One of the younger Marines raised his hand slightly, like he was still in school. Ma'am, how do you deal with the weight of it all? The responsibility, the pressure, the consequences when things go wrong? Honestly, Rebecca said, you don't deal with it alone. You lean on your team, your unit, your family. You find healthy outlets, whether that's exercise or hobbies or therapy or faith, and you remember why you're doing it. She looked around at the faces watching her. I keep a folder on my laptop. It's full of messages from soldiers I've treated and their families. Thank you notes, updates on their lives, pictures of weddings and kids and graduations. When I'm having a bad day, when the nightmares are particularly bad, when I'm questioning whether any of it matters, I open that folder, and I remember that it does matter. Every single life saved matters. Every family that got their loved one back matters. That's beautiful, ma'am, the sergeant said quietly. It's survival, Rebecca corrected. You have to find meaning in the hard things or they'll crush you. You have to remember the wins when the losses feel overwhelming, and you have to be honest with yourself about what you can and can't control. Jack Patterson spoke up. Captain, tell them about the soldier who gave you that bracelet. Rebecca looked down at her wrist where a simple braided bracelet was visible. It looked handmade, a bit worn, the kind of thing that clearly meant something. This was from a young specialist named Kyle. He was 20 years old, engaged to his high school sweetheart, planning to go to college on the GI Bill after his deployment ended. Her voice remained steady, but something in her eyes changed. He stepped on an IED during a patrol. Lost both legs above the knee and his right arm. Massive internal injuries. I worked on him for 40 minutes, did everything I could, but the injuries were too severe. He died in my arms. The cafeteria was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to listen. Before he lost consciousness for the last time, he took this bracelet off his wrist and pressed it into my hand. He said, "Give this to my girl. Tell her I love her." Then he said, "Thank you for trying," and he was gone. Rebecca touched the bracelet gently. I did give it to his fiancée at his funeral, and I told her how brave he was, how he didn't suffer at the end. All the things you're supposed to say. But then she did something I didn't expect. She took the bracelet and tied it back around my wrist. She said, "He would want you to have this. He would want you to remember that you did everything you could, that you were there so he didn't die alone." She looked up at the Marines. "I wear this every day, not as a reminder of failure, but as a reminder of why the work matters. Kyle didn't die because I failed him. He died because war is brutal and random and unfair. But in his last moments, he wasn't alone. Someone who cared was fighting for him. That matters." There wasn't a dry eye in the cafeteria now. Even the hardened SEALs looked affected. The young Marines were openly emotional. "So when you deploy," Rebecca continued, "remember that you're going to face impossible situations. You're going to do everything right and still lose. You're going to make split-second decisions that haunt you for years. You're going to see things you can't unsee and carry weights you can't put down. That's the reality of combat. No one can prepare you for how hard it really is." She leaned forward, making sure they understood the next part. "But you're also going to experience the deepest bonds you'll ever know. You're going to discover strengths you didn't know you had. You're going to make a real difference in ways large and small. You're going to come home changed, and that's okay. Change doesn't mean broken. It means you've been tested and survived." The tall Marine wiped his eyes unselfconsciously. "Thank you, ma'am. This means more than you know." "Just promise me something," Rebecca said. "Anything. When you get back, when you see someone who doesn't fit your image of what a veteran or a warrior or a hero should look like, remember this moment. Remember that you can't judge a person's worth by their appearance. That strength comes in many forms. That the person using a crutch might have earned it saving lives. That the quiet person in the corner might have done extraordinary things. That everyone deserves basic respect and dignity." All 5 Marines nodded solemnly. "We promise, ma'am." Dan Rivers checked his watch. "Captain, we need to let you get to your physical therapy appointment. But I think these Marines wanted to ask if they could do something for you." The sergeant stood up. "Ma'am, we'd like to make this right in a more tangible way." "Is there anything we can do? Any way we can help?" Rebecca thought for a moment. "Actually, yes. There's a VA hospital about 10 miles from here. They have a program where veterans can volunteer to visit wounded soldiers, talk to them, help them understand that recovery is possible. I volunteer there twice a week. If you're serious about learning and growing from this experience, that's where you can make a real difference." "We'll be there," the tall Marine said immediately. "Just tell us when and where." "Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, 6 to 8 p.m., Rebecca said. "Ask for the volunteer coordinator and tell them I sent you. They'll get you set up." Over the next several weeks, those 5 Marines became fixtures at the VA hospital. They showed up every Tuesday and Thursday without fail, spending time with wounded veterans, listening to their stories, helping with physical therapy exercises, just being present. Word spread through their unit, and soon other young Marines joined them. 3 months later, Rebecca completed her physical therapy and was cleared to return to active duty. Her send-off ceremony was small, just close friends and colleagues, but those 5 Marines showed up in their dress uniforms. They'd brought something with them. The tall Marine, now a corporal after an early promotion, stepped forward. "Captain Hayes, ma'am, we wanted to give you something before you leave." He handed her a frame. Inside was a photograph of the 5 of them at the VA hospital, surrounded by a group of elderly veterans. Below the photo was an engraved plaque that read, "To Captain Rebecca Hayes, who taught us that heroism isn't about how you look or what you wear. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching. Thank you for the lesson. Semper Fi." Rebecca's eyes welled up as she read it. "Thank you. This means everything. We also wanted you to know," the sergeant added, "that we've made it our mission to share what we learned from you. We talk about it with the younger Marines in our unit. We've started a program where senior Marines mentor junior ones about respect and perspective. We're trying to make sure no one else makes the same mistakes we did. Jay,